All right, so this is going to be form 3 of solving. So this one deals with factoring by or solving by factoring out your greatest common factor. Okay, so this first problem says factor out the greatest common factor, then solve. So after factoring GCF, set each term. So term just means you're multiplying or adding and subtracting things. Equal to 0, then solve. So this first one, the first thing you want to look at is your number. So you have 12 and you have 3. What's the biggest number that goes into each of those? Well, that's 3, so that'll go on the outside. Then what's the biggest number of x's that fits perfectly into x squared and x? That is just 1x, so that also goes on the outside. You put your parentheses. If I take 3 out of 12, or 12 divided by 3, you get 4. If I take an x out of x squared, you have an x left. And then here's a common mistake. If I take 3x out of 3x, it's not 0. You're actually just dividing. So 3x divided by 3x is just 1 equals 0. So if you want to check your work, which I suggest doing, you can try to distribute back out. So 3x times 4x gives you 12x squared. 3x times 1 gives you 3x. All right, so the first step, factor out GCF. Got that done. So now we have to set each term equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to take this and set it equal to 0. So you'll have 3x equals 0. Divide both sides by 3, and you get x equals 0. So there's one answer. And then I take this one, so 4x plus 1, set it equal to 0. Draw your line down the middle. We're going to subtract 1, subtract 1. We get 4x equals negative 1. Then divide both sides by 4. Divide by 4. You get x equals negative 1/4. So those are your two solutions there. This one, greatest common factor between 5 and 35. So we have a 5. X squared and x is just x. So then if I take 5x out of 5x squared, 5 divided by 5 is 5. X squared divided by x is x. Then we've got 35 divided by 5. That's 7. X divided by x is 1, so those will cancel out. Equals 0. So now we're going to set each set of these equal to 0. So we'll have 5x equals 0. And x plus 7 equals 0. Oops. So this solution will be x equals 0, and this solution will be x equals negative 7. Those are your two solutions there. So this one says, what are each of the equations equal to in the two word problems above? Well, that answer is 0. So this says, rewrite the following equations so they look similar to the equations in number 15. Do not solve. So these are not equal to 0 right now, so we need to make them equal to 0. So this one, you need to subtract 2x from both sides so we can get this side equal to 0. So minus 2x minus 2x. Okay, so now you can't combine an x squared and an x together because they're not like terms. So this side will turn into 4x squared minus 2x, and over here you get 0. So don't solve, so that's all we had to do. This one, let's see. So do you notice how x squared is on this side? So I always like to keep my x squared and leave it alone. Like I don't want to touch that. So instead of setting this side equal to 0, let's set this side equal to 0. So we have to get rid of 3x. So you subtract 3x from both sides. It's the same as what we did over here. 3x minus 3x is 0. 18x squared minus 3x. You cannot combine these two because this has an x squared and this has just an x. So you have 18x squared minus 3x. And don't solve. So we're done with that one. 18 says, when solving equations by factoring out the greatest common factor, what is your first step? Well, up here, our first step was to factor out a greatest common factor. But here, what did we have to do first? You have to set your equation equal to 0. 19, solve by factoring out the greatest common factor. Don't forget your first step. So first step is to set the equation equal to 0. And these two problems are actually the same as what was up here. So I'm just going to copy down. We already did our first step. So 14x squared minus 2x equals 0. And 0 equals 18x squared minus 3x. Notice how the 0 is on the right side here and the 0 is on the left side here. It doesn't matter, they're the exact same thing. So let's see here. Here, take out our greatest common factor. So you have 2, and then x. If I take 2 out of 14, you're left with 7. If I take x out of x squared, you have x. If I take 2x out of 2x, you're left with 1. So that equals 0. Set each of these equal to 0. So 2x equals 0. You get x equals 0. 7x minus 1 equals 0. We're going to add 1 to both sides. Get 7x equals 1. Divide both sides by 7. You get x equals 1/7. Okay, this one, greatest common factor, 18 and 3. That'll be a 3. So 3, we have x squared and x, so we'll have an x on the outside. If I take 3 out of 18, we have 6x, and then minus 1. Draw the line. Set each of these equal to 0. So 3x equals 0. This will be x equals 0. 6x minus 1 equals, not 6. 6x minus 1 equals 0. We'll add 1 to both sides. You get 6x equals 1. Divide both sides by 6. And you get x equals 1/6. So you should have noticed by now that every single one of these, for one of the solutions, it's actually going to be 0. So anytime you're solving with greatest common factor, one solution will always be 0. This last thing says, when solving a quadratic equation, if the equation only has the x squared term and the x term, I should solve by greatest common factor. So let's flip our paper over, or if you're doing it, actually, if you're doing it on your Chromebook, you can skip the second page, and we're going straight to the third page. This one you can cross out. This is just a picture. It means absolutely nothing. Okay, so we had talked about two different forms. Our first form we talked about was if you only have an a and a c value, you square root. If you have an a, b, and c, you factor and then solve. So now we only have an a term and a b term. So if you have an a and a b term, that means you're going to get 0 on one side, like we did. Factor out your greatest common factor. Set each factor equal to 0. Solve, and you should have two solutions. And one of your solutions will always be what? That'll be 0. So 1 will always be 0. Okay, so you have these 8 problems to do for homework. I'm just going to put a little mark by the ones that you have to set equal to 0 first. So make sure that E, F, G, and H, make sure all 4 of those you set equal to 0 first before you actually try to solve.